Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and in this video, we continue the book that we have started, The Invisible Influence, a story of the mystic Orient with great truths which can never die, by Alexander Cannon. It is in the public domain. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And for all of you subscribers, welcome back. All right, hopefully you're enjoying this particular book. I am finding it rather interesting as it's coming from a doctor's point, a psychiatrist whose credentials include being vice president of the Hong Kong Medical School, but also as well as the doctorate of psychiatric medicine from the Royal College of Medicine, and to include that he had King Edward VIII as a patient says a lot about his authenticity and the stories that he's sharing in this book. In his previous chapters, he had mentioned the experiments on telepathy, and let me fast forward to the recent declassified CIA report called the Gateway Experience, where the United States currency and military was used to research astral projection and out-of-body experiences. The author of that report was Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonald, tasked by the commander of the U.S. Army Operational Group. I actually have a video. Please do check the link on that to get a little bit more insights. And then to add that the author talked about the importance of imagination. And who else can we attribute to making such a statement but nonetheless Albert Einstein, one of the most prolific creators and inventors of our time. He was quoted as saying, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution." I appreciate when the author states, "Ignorance is the want of real knowledge, stupidity is inability to acquire knowledge, and obstinacy is miserable conceit." So, really says a lot of keeping an open mind, because the things that we as humans are accomplishing today, such as this technology that we can access so many things through our fingertips, and that the vibration of my voice is traveling to you at any other time in history, that would have been heresy, could have been impossible. Yet the word impossible could be dissected to just take the I am, make a big hyphen in between, and possible. I'm possible. And the things that I can do are great, just as Jesus had promised us, if only we have faith. All right, let's move on to the next chapter, and it is titled The Science of Hypnotism and Telepathy. That was the last I saw of the Governor General, for before sunset that very day, we set off on our search of the unknown, traveling through little-known territory with various guides. And for 42 days, we traveled in sedan-like chairs nearing Tibet, where the great Mystery Lama convent lay, surrounded by all its legends and truth. This would be our last stopping place before our final trip to the great convent, where lay even the very secret of life itself. We were not long in finding a large, spacious old cave residence, which was welcome, for at this height the warmth of the tropics was no more, and the cold of the mountain winds could be felt. I mused to myself on the science of hypnotism and telepathy as the philosophy of personal influence, the invisible influence which guides the destiny of mankind. I reflected that everything that is worth doing is worth doing well. A man is as he thinks. Deeds are greater than words. To the really skeptical, whether ignorant or learned, while he is in a state of perturbation or disinclination to listen, be wise and cast not thy pearls before swine. Be wise as the serpent and harmless as the dove. The serpent is the greatest hypnotist and telepathist of all the animal kingdom. The beast never rushes its victim. It gradually makes the intended victim aware of its presence by the subtle motion of its head. The attention of its prey secured, the serpent with consummate skill gets gradually closer and closer. Never for one moment do its fascinating eyes uncover those of its prey. By a psychological and physiological law, now known to science, the methods employed cause a complete paralysis of the volition or will, even to the complete anesthesia of certain centers of the brain. And victory is complete. There is no cruelty in this act of nature and method, as the victim is absolutely unconscious of pain or even of existence while he is devoured. I will remember a friend of mine in the wilds just going ahead of me for a while, and at length I shouted to him, but received no reply. Soon I found him, standing, as it were, at attention looking into space. I wondered what was the matter, as he spoke not when I touched him, and he felt not my presence. Touch, sound, and sight were for the time being in abeyance. Then my eye momentarily caught a glimpse of a serpent wending its way slowly towards him with a fascinating rhythmic movement of the head and its eyes glued upon him the whole of the time. The serpent had hypnotized him. I then took hold of my life preserver and hit the beast forcefully upon the head several times and then upon the neck as it began to fall to the ground. Almost immediately my friend was dehypnotized, spoke to me and asked what was my plight. When I faced him with the fact that he had been hypnotized and that only a few moments ago he was about to be killed by a serpent, he laughed at me thinking I was trying some of my own hypnotic tests on him in the waking state. However, I soon directed his attention to the serpent, which would have taken his life. He then understood, but told me that he had no recollection of the event at all, and that he had not even remembered seeing the serpent. How kind is nature! How considerate the serpent in making man oblivious to his fate, so saving him mental and physical pain. The greatest ruler in the world. I then began to muse that hypnotism is the greatest and most powerful ruler of this mighty world we live in. Daily we live under its spell and unconscious of its influence. Indeed, it is a state of mind in which suggestions both verbal and visual are received as true, whether they are or not, and there is an irresistible desire to carry out effectively the suggestions made. I began to think for a moment how we live in a world of suggestion and how we unconsciously imitate the actions of those whom we admire. Even the child imitates the actions of its elders. We eat, dress, and live in accordance with custom, which in its very essence is suggestion. The power of suggestion and the power of the will are surely very closely linked up together. We sit at the feet of the great orator, and every word he utters has magic power, and for the time being holds undivided sway in our minds. This is exactly what happened in the days of Jesus Christ, the greatest of all hypnotists, the mastermind on earth, whose words had untold power. Did not the hymn writers record that? No word from thee can fruitless fall. When we listen to the great orator and are entranced for the time being, forgetting that we are sitting in the edifice, but letting our thoughts be carried away with the orator, we are, for the time being, in a very mild and early suggestible state of actual hypnosis or hypnotism. In some way which we know not, the orator has linked up his mind with ours, and by so doing has commanded a power over us to such an extent that we will travel miles to hear him again. The secret of hypnosis. Take this thought a stage further, and you will see that the conscious effort of another to produce the hypnotic state in us only requires our belief in the hypnotizer that he can hypnotize us, and we shall magically and rapidly come under his spell. The great leaders of old. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, in the days of old, used hypnotism, although this state of the mind was not known as such until James Braid, the Manchester surgeon, gave this name to it from the Greek origin which means sleep. Mohammed, the epileptic Indian prophet, Jesus Christ, the savior of the world, the yogi and fakirs of India, the Christian scientists and the followers of Mary Baker Eddy, spiritualists, clairvoyant mediums, and the leaders of all generations, including Napoleon the epileptic, some knowingly and others unknowingly, used and still use hypnotism. Hypnotism is really the control of the unconscious mind of man, of the conscious mind of man himself, whether it be himself that controls his life so perfectly as in auto-hypnosis as practiced by the yogi, or hetero-hypnosis, which is the hypnosis practiced by others upon the subject. Napoleon controlled his thoughts in this way. When I want to think of things more pleasant, I close up the cupboards of my mind, revealing the more unpleasant things of life, and open up the cupboards containing the more pleasant thoughts. If I want to sleep, I close up all the cupboards of my mind. As I was still musing, my friend the sage returned from his walk up the mountainside to inquire the way to the great Lama monastery or convent. That great secret school of the greatest of all learning near Lhasa in the great unknown Tibet, where the people are nearly as white as we are, but have faces somewhat resembling the noble Parsi community, which totals about 80,000, out of all the millions and millions of India's population. Here, when a man marries into a family, the girl marries all his brothers also, as the womenfolk are few. The sage brought with him also on horseback a mysterious, austere personage in scarlet robes, black cap, and only one arm. He was the great messenger of the Lama convent, situate up yonder near the gods, high up away from the disturbing elements of civilization. Yet therein was the secret of all civilization, the secret of all knowledge, and the secret of life itself. The knight commander, for that is who he was, had brought the great tidings that I was to be soon honored with that highest of titles, Knight Commander of Asia, which is equal to an earl in this country. The news was equally astonishing and surprising to me. How could he know? Who would tell him? Why should he know? Yet time proved that the telepathic message which he had accurately received through all those thousands of miles was true and actual fact. As was the custom, I invited my honored guest to remain with us so long as His Excellency cared to be pleased to stay at our new massive cave dwelling, which was probably the best within miles and miles around. Having filled his belly to the full and rested a while, as dusk drew nigh, for now dusk once more was an actual phenomenon, whereas in the tropics the day turns into night almost in the twinkling of an eye, he began to ask questions, and amongst the many were, "Surely in Europe you do not consider mesmerism or hypnotism, which we call the psychic state, to be only one state of mind, but are there not many stages? Now tell me." I proceeded to word my answer as follows. The stages of hypnotism as we know it in Europe vary from almost complete consciousness to complete unconsciousness. By consciousness, I imply all the thoughts which we are fully aware of at this very moment and nothing more. Unconsciousness implies a state of mind in which we are not aware of what is taking place in the outer world around us. The conscious mind is identical with consciousness. The unconscious mind is a mental state in which we think of things without consciously being aware that we are thinking of those things. It is these workings of our unconscious mind which guide our daily life and adjust or even alter our personality. The knight then asked me if I could show him anything on the higher planes of the psychic state which could be demonstrated in the lower planes of the body. I had to think carefully concerning his question, for to misunderstand it would be a tragedy, and to infer that I did not fully comprehend his learned interrogation would be disastrous. So I proceeded, calling and commanding my chief boy and the houseboy also to sit down in these 2 chairs. They did so. Then, with a wave of my hand, I sent them both into a deep hypnotic trance. Having demonstrated this fact to the satisfaction of my distinguished guest, I continued with my experiments. I commanded the chief boy to open his eyes without awakening and to add up a list of figures on the right-hand side of the paper. In fact, there were 2 columns of figures, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side, but for the left-hand side column, a negative hallucination was produced. That is, he was told he could not see any other figures on the paper but the column of figures to which I had referred. And having done so, to close his eyes again. This being done, I then repeated the experiments with the houseboy. I asked the chief boy what he noticed about the figures, and he told me as he added up the column, the figures became smaller and smaller. Afterwards, I asked the houseboy, and he replied that the figures became fainter and fainter as he added up the column of figures. The explanation is that during the hypnotic state, the field of consciousness is greatly limited, and therefore, if it be assumed that to begin with the person's visual capacity is 10/10, then when he has added up 6/10 of the column, he has only 4/10 of his consciousness left for vision, the other 6/10 having been taken up in the process of addition. When the subject has added 9/10 of the column, he has only 1/10 left at his disposal to see, and therefore the result is either a very small number visible or a faint and distinct number. The same applies to hearing and addition. See The Lancet, November 19, 1932. The chief boy was a well-educated Beijing scholar, and he was asked to go through the multiplication tables from twice 1 are 2 right through to 12 times 12 are 144. Without being instructed, he went through, as ascertained after the experiment, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth multiplication tables, seeing them as if printed on a sheet, black background with white numbers. But he could no longer see them and had to now listen to imaginary children saying them, and continued to do so right through the 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 times. But then he could neither see the tables nor hear the children say them, and so had to say them to himself to the end of the tables. I have since carried out numerous tests and found that this applies to all peoples, and that as the person tested is lower in the scale of intelligence, there is less visual and more auditory thought. The lower in the scale, practically only what I term movement or kinesthetic thought occurs, the person having to say the tables to himself. A great psychological lesson is demonstrated that as mental fatigue sets in, the process of thought transforms from visual to auditory, and from auditory to kinesthetic. In other words, from pure seeing to hearing to doing. This does not uphold the idea of many psychological theorists that visual is the most primitive type of thought. I would suggest that while symbolism in picture form is a primitive type of thought, nevertheless, visual thought itself is one of the highest forms of thought and one of the very best aids to memory, without which there would be no growth of mind. Other experiments carried out even in this remote part of the world showed that suicidal tendencies, as well as other tendencies and complexes, are readily detected and love attachments noted. The austere personage at this point interrupted and asked what my explanation was concerning the cure of stammering by hypnosis. I pointed out that stammers are permanently cured by hypnosis, and that I believe the reason is that the stammerer is normally a person who thinks in terms of hearing. That is, when he thinks of a field, he does not mainly think of a green field, leafy trees, hedges of the river flowing by, and the cows eating the grass, but instead he hears the rustling of the trees, the lullaby of the leaves, the river rippling, and the cows chewing their cud. But during hypnosis, he becomes a visual thinker, as determined by my psychograph records and the subjective examination afterwards. It amounts to this, that the subject can easily picture a thing during the hypnotic state which he can only recall in terms of hearing in the waking state and pays little or no attention to actually picturing things. This suggests that the reason for so many cures of stammering by periods of silence or rest treatment and the like is that when they do not speak and they do not hear others speak, their mind begins to think in pictures. At this point, the Night Commander intercepted. Do you know that hypnosis and sleep can both occur without loss of consciousness? Hypnosis and sleep without unconsciousness. It has been shown that sleep can occur without loss of consciousness and loss of consciousness without sleep. Is hypnosis a particular form of sleep? Fatigue is not necessary for either sleep or hypnosis. Fatigue might actually prevent sleep. You have heard of Pavlov and his theory which explains sleep and hypnosis as varieties of cortical inhibition. That is, the higher cells of the brain are not working. He states that the cortical elements are functionally exhausted with comparative ease and speaks of a scattered sleep or sleep of separate groups of cellular structures. Greater mental effort can actually send some people to sleep. After a few more comments, we retired to our well-earned rest, the sage not having uttered a word. End of chapter 5. Stay right here as we move on to the next chapter. And before we do, hit that like button, and if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Next chapter, 6. The invisible influence yet visible. The next morning we arose at an early hour, and having dined physically, we now prepared ourselves for a mental feast. The sage commented upon the wonderful psychic atmosphere which accompanied the Night Commander, whereupon the latter spoke. Have you not sat in a room with company, and the moment Mr. X entered there was a feeling of restraint and uneasiness, but when Mr. Y arrived, an unexplainable feeling of ease and pleasantness pervaded the whole atmosphere? We call this personality, but what is it but the invisible hypnotic influence which pervades that person's surroundings? In the days of the Nazarene, Jesus Christ's hypnotic ministry on earth, did not his hearers feel the wonder of his hidden power, like the nail and the magnet? While the nail is drawn to the magnet, it can draw other smaller nails, but for the time being only, for on withdrawing the upper nail from the magnet, it has lost its power, and the lower nails fall to the ground. As the larger nail is magnetic only whilst it clings to the magnet, and away from it, it has no power. I suggest that you study carefully the methods of hypnosis used by Jesus, as recorded in the New Testament. The essence of revivals in days gone by and in days to come can all be explained in this way. The magnetic power of suggestion. The power of suggestion is magnetic and all-powerful. If you think that you are ill, you will soon become ill. If you are ill but make up your mind both consciously and unconsciously to get well, you will get well. There is, however, one snag. A person may consciously make up his mind to get well, but his unconscious mind may refuse to accept this suggestion and so not allow him to get well. In these cases, treatment by hypnotism is effectual. Surely, to be candid, the whole matter boils down to faith. Faith in ourselves, faith in others, faith in someone who is omnipotent, the latter being a sure method of tapping and dealing with unconscious mind. Remember that the greater the object of the faith, the greater the result. Eliminate faith from life, and what remains? The answer is little or nothing that is worth having. Emotion's marvelous power. Emotion sways the world through its wonderful hypnotic power, and this is clearly linked up with the still small voice of conscience. which is the voice of the unconscious mind. We believe this to be the soul of man, directing our conscious thoughts when direction is most needed. The power of suggestion, music, and rhythm is all important in the set forms of worship, such as the services held in distant Britain in its churches. I mean to suggest that such a service must be run with the efficiency of a first-class entertainment. In the hymns, prayers, solos, or anthems, lessons, and sermons must all be well chosen, well delivered, well timed, and in perfect harmony and vibration with each other and with the universal mind. Jesus, the psychologist of first rank, severely criticized the methods of the churches in the New Testament. Read St. Matthew chapter 6 and observe for yourself these facts. He knew that the unconscious mind insisted on orderliness, emotion, and rhythm, or what we term being in tune with the infinite, in vibration and harmony with the universal mind. And if your churches are to prosper, you must carry out these, his advices. The prayers uttered in earnest by the thousands of people in the quiet of their own homes from their hearts carry untold telepathic suggestion to a waiting, suggestive world. Hypnotism and the mentally afflicted. We then went on to discuss the casting out of devils as related in the Bible, when the sage interrupted, saying, "Have you heard of Dr. King's work at Berhampore? You know he employed mesmerism, as hypnotism was then known, for years in his large asylum, where he claimed to have found it of great use in maintaining quiet and discipline." I then pointed out, Braid, the Manchester surgeon, recorded successful treatment of several cases of delusional insanity, which in most instances were complicated by hallucinations or visions. Voisin, the great French physician, records amongst many cases his most difficult one, a Miss X, aged 25 years, whose grandmother was an epileptic suffering from fits. 5 years previously, the patient began to suffer from mania with visions and the hearing of imaginary voices. When Voisin first saw her, she had frequent acute attacks of furious delirium lasting from 8 to 14 days, during which time she refused to eat or drink, and spat at her attendants and tried to bite them. The French physician succeeded in hypnotizing her in one of the attacks by holding her eyes forcibly open for 3 hours and compelling her to look fixedly at a magnesium lamp. He then succeeded in suggesting that she would sleep for 23.5 hours, during which sleep she took food and drink she had refused in the waking state. At first, she was only allowed to remain awake 3.5 hours a week, but as she improved, the duration of the hypnotic sleep was diminished. After 4 months' treatment, all morbid symptoms disappeared, and she became polite, sociable, and amiable. 15 months later, there had been no relapse, and she obtained the post of wardrobe maid at a leading French hospital. The knight exclaimed how great was Voisin's work, but how lacking he was in perfect method and determining by mental process. The distinguished guest recalled that in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 8, verse 28, it states, "And when he came to the other side, into the country of Gergesenes, there met him 2 possessed with devils coming out of the tombs, exceedingly force, so that no man might pass that way." You will recall, he said, that Christ cast out these devils and that these 2 people went away whole and cured forever. I then took the liberty of asking the knight how he knew the Bible so well, and he replied, "We know all things. We are aware of all that takes place on this little planet named Earth. We knew of your coming months before you even decided to come here. You see, when you thought you had used an act of will in deciding to come here, you had really merely acted under our telepathic instructions." "But," I replied, "why did you choose me amongst all these many others in the world?" Then, with a penetrating gaze which I shall never forget, this great messenger from the higher world of thought gravely commented, "We take you, not at your present value, but because of your capabilities. It is what you will be that concerns us. You are fated for this, and no man can deter you from your faithful following. Modern miracles. Why, asked my chief boy, don't people work miracles today? The sage replied, we do still work miracles, only now in modern days, these same things are spoken of as science and not miracles. You see, a miracle is stated to be a wonder, something which excites astonishment and is due to a sensible deviation from the known laws of nature, being held to be wrought by a supernatural being. Now, we do not accept this as being either supernatural or a sensible deviation from the known laws of nature, and therefore how can it be a miracle? May I remind you that Milne Bronwell recalls a case of commercial traveler who became absolutely helpless and thought himself possessed by the devil. Ordinary attempts to hypnotize him failed until the hypnotist humored his morbid idea and addressed himself to the obsessing devil. He said, "Thou devil, I defy thee to put thy victim to sleep in that chair. I defy thee to do it by any means whatsoever." The devil fell into the trap and the man into a deep sleep, in which he was open to the hypnologist's suggestions, and the traveler was made to relate the cause of his trouble. This appeared to have been an act of infidelity to his wife while on his travels, which so preyed upon his mind that he thought himself damned and given over to the devil. This idea, ridiculous though it may seem, was combated, conquered, and the patient was there and then cured. The devil had indeed been cast out. And so to bed. We rested that night in the company of our distinguished guest, whom I would call the messenger of peace. End of chapter. All right, hit that like button and let's head over to the next video where we will learn about pain and the imagination.